And we're live. And this week we have the amazing Ernie Baca, who's also known as SirDragonX on YouTube, who runs the very interesting YouTube channel, which I am a fan of, called Mexico Retirement No Ball. I think I might have got that wrong. It's maybe Retire in Mexico No Ball. I remember the No Ball bit.
It's Retired in Mexico No Ball.
Okay, that's the name of it. So, first of all, let's start off with the obvious question. Why did you end up retiring in Mexico, and what made you start a YouTube channel about retiring in Mexico?
Very, very interesting question, Tim. Basically, I kind of moved to Mexico on a whim, per se. Here, my background is I'm married to a person from Mexico. We traveled here to Mexico a lot before I retired. I was fortunate enough to be able to retire at 52. And one of the things that we noticed, and that I point out in one of my videos, is a lot of people are moving to Mexico because it's getting very, very hard to live back in their home country on retirement. Now, I was fortunate enough to have a nice retirement. I had a better retirement than most people do because they retire on Social Security. But I have a different type of retirement given my occupation. One of the things is that we were looking into having a secondary home, sort of like a vacation home in a foreign country. We were figuring we'd live there for 6 months, 3 months. I also have a place back in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So we said, hey, let's move back and forth. But I never took it seriously. I never thought I was going to move to Mexico permanently. We came to San Miguel de Allende for my birthday. I love the Dia de los Muertos celebration. And it just so happens that we saw a booth where they were advertising housing. And I said, hey, let's just go look and see how much a house cost here. Needless to say, we went on the tour. We never had any intentions of buying, and we walked out signing a contract for a house. With the intention of, this is just going to be a vacation home. And actually, the house we signed a contract on isn't the house we actually eventually bought. We went home. We started to evaluate our quality of life in Mexico versus our quality of life in the United States, which I would have still been comfortably living in the United States. We were comfortably living there, even on retirement. And I just came up with the idea that, hey, why don't we just move to Mexico? So we just did it. The one thing that we experienced, that I experienced personally, and one thing that I stress with everybody is that everybody's experience is different. For example, we speak the language. We know the culture. I grew up in the culture. I grew up on the South Texas border, even though I'm not I'm half Puerto Rican and half Mexican, but even though I grew up around the culture. So we figured, how hard can it be? We're just going to go. We know everything. We know the language. We know the culture. We're going to adapt really quickly. Well, what people don't realize is that, for example, my wife is from the north. Here in Mexico, culture varies very, very widely from one region to another. So, and then of course, I'm from the United States. So even though I thought I knew the culture, we moved down here and it was quite a challenge. Adjusting to a different culture. And this is adjusting to a different culture from people that speak the language, that grew up around the culture. Even my wife had an issue with adjusting here because the central part of Mexico works a lot different than the northern part of Mexico. The other thing that I did notice is that there's a big support community on Facebook, on social media, on YouTube about moving to Mexico. And one of the reasons why I started my channel's a little bit different. It's been a little bit controversial too, is that one of the things that I noticed, and I'm not putting down these YouTube channels because one of my suggestions is actually to watch as much YouTube as you can, visit as many Facebook groups as you can, do as much research as you can. So even if I kind of put down some of these YouTube channels now, I'm not telling you not to visit them. I'm actually telling you to visit them. I'm going to sound a little bit hypocritical here.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've noticed about a lot of the YouTube channels is that, and also the Facebook groups, is that a lot of these, and even my YouTube channel, is based on my personal experience. And a lot of the YouTube channels out there, there's this kind of glorification of coming and moving to Mexico. You can live here on $1,500 a month. You can live here on $900 a month. As a matter of fact, there's a YouTube channel that all they do is interview people saying, oh, I live here on $800 a month. I live here on $1,500 a month. Now that's very practical. You can, but then you have to remember that there's a lot of things that these YouTube channels don't mention, such as living here legally, residency. $1,500 a month sometimes doesn't qualify you to get Mexican residency. And even some of these YouTube channels even kind of advocate illegal behavior in the sense that, oh, don't worry, just come in on a tourist visa and don't leave. Mexico doesn't care. Or, you know what? You can run to the border every 6 months and get a tourist permit. And these are things that are kind of dangerous kind of piece of advice, because the Mexican government has really changed in the last 3 years. What people don't understand is that the Mexican government for almost 100 years has been run by two different institutional parties. So coming in on a tourist permit and staying here 3 years ago was totally fine, and Mexico didn't enforce the immigration laws. As a matter of fact, there's several documentaries about all the illegal Americans living here and how Mexico just kind of turns a blind eye. And the same thing with this behavior of going to the border for 6 months. Not a problem. We'll stamp your visa. But what a lot of people don't understand is that when this new president came in, a lot of that changed. And a lot of the reasons why you could go to the border for every 6 months and stamp your visa is because Mexico didn't even have the infrastructure. Everything was done by paper. So they didn't know. If you come up to the Mexican immigration and say, I want a visa for 6 months, tourist permit, not a visa, it's a permit. I want a permit for 6 months. Not a problem, because there was no way of checking in a computer. Now immigration has computer systems where they're tracking people. So a lot of this advice is, it's great to glorify. And like I said, a lot of this information is great information. And I always tell people, watch as much YouTube as you can. But at the same time, that's why I created my YouTube channel, is to try to educate you in what is. And then here's the other problem here in Mexico. Sometimes we're very, very accustomed, I'm almost sure in the United States and in the UK, we're kind of a law-based society. There's regulations and there's laws, and you have to follow them. You know, that's just the way it is. If I have a law behind me, I can tell the police or I can tell whoever, this is the law. The problem in Mexico is that laws are very different. Sometimes they apply, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they apply to certain people, sometimes they don't. So what I'm trying to do is present the reality of coming here. I'm not trying to scare people from coming here, but what I'm telling people is saying, look, if you want to go every 6 months, don't worry about it. Go ahead and do it. But at the same time, these are the consequences that you could face. And actually, several people already have experienced those consequences. They build a life. They've been here 10 years. Then all of a sudden they go to the border and they come back and the immigration official says, sorry. Or, you know what, you have 7 days. I'm not giving you a 180-day permission. I'm giving you a 7-day permission to go pick up your stuff and leave. And there's a lot of reasons behind this. And one of the things that I'm trying to do on my YouTube channel is trying to explain the reason. And that's kind of why I got involved in this project. The other thing that I try to do here is what a lot of people need to understand about these YouTube channels is these people make money. I mean, there's a very popular YouTube channel with over 270,000 subscribers. That YouTube channel what people don't understand, even though they love to watch them, they're very entertaining. Very entertaining is I call it reality TV in Mexico. But these individuals are making close to six figures. And so what I try to do is try to say, put this in perspective. Watch their YouTube channel because they have a lot of great, I mean, they've traveled all over Mexico. And they do have a lot of good points, but sometimes they don't understand the culture. I give an example. They went to Ajijic, and Ajijic is very historic for their cobblestone streets. And they're sitting there complaining, oh my God, I tripped on the cobblestone streets. They need to pave the streets. Well, you need to understand that's part of their history. That's part of their culture. So when you're sitting there saying all of these criticisms about this town, you're actually insulting the Mexican people. And they actually, in a couple of their videos, saying, oh my God, we've gotten death threats and people have threatened us. Well, the reason why people have threatened you is because a lot of the content that you're putting out is actually insulting the Mexican people, and you don't even realize it. I mean, they have good intentions. So one of the things that I'm trying to do in my project is, and that's why I call it no bull, is I'm going to present you with the facts. I'm going to tell you the regulation and rules. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you the reality of what you may face. And so that's basically it in a nutshell.
I have so many questions because I do live in a border city. I live in San Diego. And this is a question. Moving to Mexico is a reality for many people who live in San Diego and probably Southern California, really. It becomes so expensive to live here. We're looking for alternative places to go. Where can we afford to live? Is Mexico a possibility? And then we start to share stories. What is the reality of working in America, living in Mexico? I know you live farther down, but that's a common thing going on, I imagine, across all the border cities.
Well, it's happening a lot in the border cities, but also down in central Mexico. There's a lot of people that live here. And now with the pandemic, we have a lot of people that have decided, you know what? I can work remotely. I can come down here to Mexico. That we have a lot of remote workers down here that have decided to bring their families. It's become a reality. Now, I know in San Diego, to be honest with you, not as much in Texas, but in San Diego, I even have seen a very big trend of people that are commuting. They're going and living in Tijuana, and they commute to San Diego for work because they just can't afford to live there. The cost of living in California is very high. Fortunately, in South Texas, it's not as high as it is in California. So it's becoming a reality. One of my videos I did on retirement, one of the things that we're facing, and I don't mean to get off the subject, but this is kind of related. But for example, for people retiring, we're facing, and actually I watched the Netflix that I suggest everybody watch. It's called Money Explained. And on one of the Netflix series, it's called, one of the episodes is called Retirement Explained. And right now in the United States, and I don't know how it is in the UK, actually in the UK, when I was doing my research, they actually went away from the 401k system and went back, I think, to a retirement where the employers need to give a pension. But in the 80s, we went to this 401k, your own responsibility. So a lot of people can't afford to put into a 401k. So when they retire, they're either doing one of two things. They're working till they pass away, or they get a Social Security check of $1,500 a month. And the reality of living, and even if you work at a higher end job where your Social Security is $3,000 a month, it's still very expensive to live in the United States. So a lot of people are looking for that option to come to Mexico. They're looking for other countries, not just Mexico. But Mexico seems to be one of the biggest choices because it is very close to the United States. I can be back. I live in the central part of Mexico. If I travel back to McAllen, Texas, I can be back in 8.5 hours by driving. versus maybe living in Portugal, which is also very popular. I have to take a plane. I have the time change. So Mexico is becoming a very, very attractive location to move to.
Absolutely. What I'm seeing in San Diego is our retired community wants to retire in Mexico, Tijuana, Rosarita, some of those other places that are in Baja California, not only because of the cost of living, but also medical benefits. And they can get the medical and dental down there that they wouldn't be able to get possibly in America for less. How compatible is medical and dental and that kind of thing in Mexico? I'm hearing good things. So
I can speak from personal experience. I'm going to tell you what, I was treated for cancer down here in Mexico.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick story. I hope I talk a lot, so you're going to have to excuse me, but I'm going to give you an example of medical care in Mexico. Now, there's two types of medical care. Make this clear. There's a public health system, and then there's also the private healthcare system. The private healthcare system, let's just say that I will never go back to the United States to get medical care. The reason why, and I'm not putting down the medical care in the United States, is that what happened is I had a lump in my throat. And I said, I need to take care of this. I went to the doctor in the United States, and the doctor said, okay, well, we're going to do a bunch of tests. 3/4 of them didn't have anything to do with my lump in my throat. Everything from high cholesterol, anything they could charge the insurance. And then they said, okay, we're going to also do a echogram to see if the echogram confirmed that I had a lump in my throat. So now the next step is we need to do an MRI. Well, they went to my insurance company and they said, okay, we need to get pre-authorization. And it takes 8 to 10 days.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing with medical care over there. Okay, you make an appointment, you get your test, you have to make another appointment to get the results of your test. And then you make another appointment to get another test. Well, basically 8 to 10 days passed, nothing. They want more information. The insurance company wants more information. Yeah. 2 weeks passed, 3 weeks passed, and a month passed, and I was still waiting for my pre-authorization from an MRI. So I finally said, you know what? We're going to Monterrey, because I was living on the South Texas border at the time. And Monterrey is 2.5 hours. And I said, I don't care what it costs. I don't care if it costs $3,000. We have to get this MRI because this lump is there. We get to Mexico. We find a ENT. This ENT happened to be a professor at one of the best medical schools in Mexico. He also studied his residency in Israel. He also did a residency in pediatric ear, nose, and throat at MIT and Harvard. So you can imagine I had one of the best doctors. Yeah. The ENT said, not a problem. I met with him in the morning. He said, you know what? Oh, and this is the difference too. In the United States, when you see a doctor, they put you in a room and you wait for 3 hours. No, here you see a doctor. If your appointment's at 8:30, it's at 8:30. And you don't go and you don't get put in a room. You actually see the doctor in his office. And he's got a little examining area to the side. And he said, you need to get an MRI. I'm going to send you to this place. And this afternoon, we will review your MRI. Come back in the evening because your MRI should be done by at least, and if not, tomorrow morning. I went and made an appointment for my MRI. And it was an MRI with contrast, which is more expensive. And when came time to pay the bill, I said, how much will that be? $270.
Wow.
And I'm like looking at the people waiting to pay $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 that it costs. I don't even know. And granted, I'm still waiting for pre-approval by the insurance company back in the United States. So I went back to the doctor and I said, you know what? Here's and actually they give you the disc, they give you the results. You get your own, none of this, doctor won't release it. Doctor keeps your records. No, you get your own records. I went and visited with the doctor. They took a biopsy and it was negative for cancer. He says, you know what? It's probably a cyst. We're going to need to remove it. And, we have to remove it. So I said, well, if I do the surgery here, he was looking at me, well, if you do it here at the private hospital, which is one of the best in Mexico, Monterrey, it's kind of expensive. And, I can do it at a cheaper hospital. And I said, well, how much is it going to cost, doc? Just tell me. Oh, it's around $5,000. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, you know what? If I have to pay the $5,000 out of my pocket, that's what I would have had to pay in the United States out of pocket with my insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Then I decided to talk to the insurance company because I had served in Brazil overseas for 3 years. And at the time I had Blue Cross Blue Shield. I changed my insurance, but at that time they did cover me overseas. So I called up my insurance company and I said, hey, this is my deal. I have this operation. Do you cover it? Oh, yes, we cover it. Not a problem. We cover it just like in the United States. I said, well, what do I need to do? Do I need to get a pre-authorization? No, you just send us the receipts and we'll reimburse you. And I said, well, what about my MRI? And he said, yeah, just send us the receipts as long as you have the documentation and everything else. And I asked the insurance company, like, what's going on here? Like, I'm still waiting for pre-approval for an MRI. This is kind of weird. Yeah. And they explained to me, they said, well, let me just put it this way. How much was your MRI in Mexico? I said, $280 or $70. They said, you have any idea how much an MRI here in the United States costs? Why do you think that we make them do a pre-approval? Even if you don't need that MRI, us paying out $270 is going to save us money in the end. So that's why we rarely, if ever, ask any questions. So I went, got my surgery, and the doctor observed when he was taking out my cyst, he observed 2 lymph nodes that were attached to my carotid artery. Subsequently, in asking other doctors here in the United States, they probably would have left me alone, taken out my cyst, and closed me up. This doctor said, you know what? For some reason, this doesn't look right. I'm going to take out you don't need lymph nodes, so I'm going to take them out anyway. So he stopped the surgery. He went and got my blood type because he said, if I cut into the carotid, I'm going to need blood. And actually, which was explained to me later by U.S. doctors, they wouldn't have touched me there because, God forbid, they do something that they shouldn't have done, and I could end up suing them. And he took off those 2 lymph nodes. Well, it comes back when he sent them off to pathology. I had cancer, head and neck cancer. Then I went to an oncologist. The oncologist basically said, you're going to need radiation and chemotherapy. And I did my radiation and my chemotherapy in Monterrey. A lot of people kept telling me, why don't you go to the Houston Cancer Center? Because it's the best cancer center. One of the issues that I had with my oncologist, I talked to the oncologist, I said, well, what do you think of the option of me going to Houston? He says, you want me to tell you something? We use the same equipment and even better equipment than they use at MD Anderson Hospital. So if you want to go there, I don't have a problem with it. And my oncologist happens to be on the board of the International Cancer Society, which is based out of France. So I had a top-notch, world-renowned oncologist treating me. And the one thing that I also noticed about medical care was, for example, my ear, nose, and throat doctor, my oncologist, I had their personal phone number, and I was communicating with them during WhatsApp. My surgeon was texting me every day to check on me. In the United States, you want to talk to the doctor, I got a pain, you need to talk to the nurse. And you're lucky if the nurse even calls you back. So the quality, and then you look at my cancer treatment, you're looking at radiation and chemotherapy, ran me about $25,000. which is very, very inexpensive compared to what it would have cost an insurance company in the United States.
Yeah.
My out-of-pocket expenses, because they only cover you, my insurance covers me at 90%, was probably a quarter of what my out-of-pocket would have been in the United States. And I got top-notch medical care by a doctor that went to MIT and Harvard and Israel and even studied in Israel, and an oncologist that was top-notch, probably better medical care than I would have ever received in the United States. And I'm not saying that medical care in the United States isn't good. They use the latest technology, but I think the biggest problem that we have with medical care, and the reason why it's become so expensive and everything else is like that, is it's become a business, and the business has become such a big monster that it's with the insurance companies, the drug companies. I'll even give you an example. My wife takes a drug for diabetes, which runs several $1,000s here. I mean, not here, in the United States. Her issue is that she's got a condition, a different type of diabetes, where her A1C comes out fine. So the insurance company is saying, sorry, we won't cover it. We're not going to pay $2,000 or $3,000 worth a month worth of medication. You know how much that medication costs here in Mexico for a month's supply? $110. Manufactured at the same facility as the medication that you get in the United States. So that's one of the other reasons why a lot of Americans come here, because medical care is a lot cheaper. Now, I'm fortunate that my medical insurance from the U.S. does cover me. Not all of them do, but that's one of the things that I do tell people: check if you have U.S. insurance through your retirement. Check if they cover you overseas. The only difference is now some insurance companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield, if you get admitted to the hospital, they will call the hospital, try to make agreements with the hospitals. And it's not as easy as a process. In the United States, you just give them your insurance card and they file the claims for you. I had to do my own claims, but it was worth the savings, and it was worth the medical care that I got, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You're explaining a misconception about Mexican medical and dental, even, I'm sure. We've been taught the exact opposite about Mexican medical. And I know that we have been taught that. And I think during COVID, it's kind of uncovered some of these misconceptions that we believed, and then started seeing that some of the countries that we've heard negative things about aren't working in that way, actually. So you're kind of speaking a truth into something that is becoming more obvious. What is the reality of someone going down there who doesn't have medical insurance? If a retired person was to move down without any kind of medical insurance, is that a possibility? I mean, can they get covered?
That's a great question, because you can get Mexican medical insurance. Okay. They do cover private. As a matter of fact, I have a Mexico medical insurance policy, to be honest with you. I use my American insurance because it's a little bit easier. I get reimbursed and everything else. But I have Mexican medical insurance. For example, if I get in a car accident, what if I get a heart attack and I need to be treated now? I don't need to be pulling out my credit card, or because a lot of these you have to pay ahead of time, or you have to have insurance, of course, before the hospital lets you in. There are medical insurance policies, but there's only two catches to this. The first catch is that they will not cover pre-existing conditions. Like, for example, anything related to my cancer, they will not cover. They do a physical, they do blood work. Also, the price of insurance is based on age, so it does go up. So there are some caveats to having private medical insurance here. The other thing too is Medicare or Medicaid doesn't cover you here. Now, I do know that Medicaid has some type of, if it's an emergency situation, they'll cover you overseas. I'm not too familiar with it because I haven't gotten to that age where I have to opt for Medicare or not. But I do know a lot of people that do live here. What they usually do is they go back to the United States for anything major. And then, especially those on Medicare, will travel once a year and go back, do their stuff, get their medication. But usually medications, the biggest thing with older people here that are on medications, heart medication, for example, I'm even on a cholesterol medication. That cholesterol medication costs me $10 for a month's supply. You're not looking at paying these exorbitant amounts of money for medical care. Or, for example, you go and you get banged up, you need stitches. You're looking at going into an emergency room and getting it done for $80 to $100, even in a private healthcare facility. So it's kind of an affordable thing. So even when you don't have insurance, the little things that you need to be taken care of, I got a flu, I've got a cold, those things you can kind of afford per se. Major medical is a different story. So that is one concern that a lot of people have coming down here. Now, like you said about the misconceptions, there's a lot of misconceptions about, like when I was going to get treated for cancer. A lot of those misconceptions are based on, for example, a lot of people come down here to Mexico for plastic surgery. And there's a lot of scammers out there that aren't even doctors that perform surgeries and stuff like that. So you hear these horror stories of people dying on the operating table. And these horror stories are not representative of medical care in Mexico. They're representative of somebody that wanted to go down and get breast implants and pay $200 instead of $3,000. If you go to a very reputable plastic surgeon here in Mexico, trust me, you're going to get the same or better medical care if you go to a really good hospital at half the price that you would in the United States. The problem is that these people went to a doctor that promised them something for $200 that if it sounds too good to be true, it's too good to be true.
Before we have got this kind of the longest answers ever, I think, on this particular interview, but they've been good. I wanted to ask, there's two questions I wanted to talk about, and I think I'm going to ask the positive one, which is like, when I've been watching videos about Mexico and the like, I've been surprised by how varied the whole country is. So could you kind of briefly, well, or not briefly, describe all the different areas of Mexico and what sort of areas would appeal to particular people? And in terms of retirement, is there anywhere that you would recommend people don't retire to in Mexico? And where would you suggest people most likely place they will want to retire, depending on the level of Spanish, I suppose?
Well, that's also an interesting question, and I'll try to be brief. It all depends on your personal situation financially. It also depends on your personal likes or dislikes. Do you want to move to a place near the beach? Do you dislike heat and humidity? So all of those factors play in where you want to go. Most of the areas in Mexico are beautiful areas. Every area has its pluses and minuses. And I think what's very important for everybody to do is to research and decide what kind of place I want to live in, and then do the research on that area. Because even when you talk about cost of living is relative. Some places are more expensive than others, but at the same time, how much more expensive? San Miguel is considered one of the more expensive places to live, but you can still live here on $1,500 a month if you do it right. So it all depends on what your likes are. I live in the central part of Mexico. We have San Diego weather all year round. It's dry. But at the same time, we're up in the mountains, in the hill country. So it's 6,000 feet above sea level. Your health condition may not, there's some people that have health conditions that can't live in the high altitudes. Mm-hmm. So it's all dependent. And I tell people just to do your research. And there's no right place to live in Mexico or no wrong place. Now, I would stay away from the border because of the violence. But as far as, I always encourage people to learn the language because it's very hard to get around without knowing the language. There's a lot of communities. If you go onto the Facebook group, expat Facebook groups, and ask questions, there are communities you can get by with just English. But there'll come a point in time where you need to learn Spanish. And then there's a lot of people that are resistant to it. And I even hear, well, but I'm too old. I'm too old to learn a new language. I said, well, you know what? When we get older, we have to exercise our brain. And what a better way to exercise our brain than to learn a new language. So there's not, I wouldn't say it's a personal preference. We just chose San Miguel because we love it here. I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico. The ambient here is a lot like Santa Fe, New Mexico. A lot of artists, very artsy. So I would say, I would advise people to look as much as they can, to go to all these Facebook groups. The only thing that I warn about Facebook groups and YouTube channels is they need to take everything into perspective, and they need to understand where the person's coming from. For example, there's a YouTube channel, one of my favorite actually. They live in the Riviera Maya, or Cancun. A lot of the advice that he gives is, and he's a very, very, as a matter of fact, giving you the facts and everything. Probably I've even used his videos several times to post in Facebook groups to use as an example. But the problem is he lives on the beach. So all the advice he's giving is for people in his area. So you need to take that into consideration. What works over there for him may not work over here in San Miguel de Allende. And I've actually even pointed out in one or two of his videos, you need to understand that he did a video on citizenship. In order to own property close to the beach, you have to be a Mexican citizen. But at the same time, if you live in central Mexico, the advantages of Mexican citizenship may not be the same as the advantages of being on the beach.
So, well, I might as well ask the $10 million question of like, is Mexico safe? I was going to, there should probably, well, 2 hours later we'll be back. But I mean, this is where your channel has been controversial in that, like, there are, I mean, I've seen it on the YouTube channel. Everybody's like, oh, it's all pretty unicorns. And I'm sure that it's like anywhere, Mexico, if you know how to behave, then you can thrive. But the biggest objection anybody's going to say, and I've had it even when I mention Mexico to other people, is like, it's not safe. So is Mexico safe? And what are some tips for people who are worried about that?
Well, I'm going to give my famous answers. It depends. And that's the answer that I give everywhere. You know what? I came from a law enforcement background, so I'm a little bit more aware than a lot of people that were here. I worked a lot with the Mexican government in the area of crime here in Mexico. Crime is changing here. One of the things that I get, and this is ironic that you asked the question, is one of the things that I get from my former colleagues is when I tell them, oh yeah, I'm living in Mexico. And you got to remember that we have a different view of Mexico because of our job. And I tell them, no, I'm living in Mexico. Oh my God, isn't it? It's dangerous over there, isn't it? How is it? What I tell people is, does crime exist here in Mexico, and is it dangerous? Is there cartels? Yes. But, and you hear this argument on Facebook, and I'm going to use the classic argument, which is kind of a fallacy, but it's not. But there's people that live in New York City, that live in Chicago. Is Chicago safe? Yeah, certain areas of Chicago are safe. Is New York City safe? Yes. I've been walking in New York City at 2 o'clock in the morning, not in the Bronx, in Manhattan, maybe. So what I stress a lot, and I've become very controversial. And one of the reasons why is because my videos say, is Mexico dangerous? And nobody ever gets past the title. No one watches the video. They just see the dangerous part and start arguing and start saying, no, it's safe. And I feel safe. And I live in this place and it's okay. One of the things that I stress is that security, it doesn't matter where you live. You know, you come from San Diego, from the UK. I bet you in San Diego, you can tell me a lot of places that you don't go in San Diego or in LA. You just don't go into those neighborhoods. I bet you in the UK, you can tell me places in the UK you don't want to visit. And it's the same thing here in Mexico. The thing that's important as far as safety and danger and all of that stuff is just being aware of what's going on around you. One of the things that I stress in my videos is that, look, I'm not trying to scare you here, but this does exist. And the problem that we run into a lot of times is that we get this false sense of security. I live in San Miguel de Allende. It's a peaceful town. A lot of tourists come here. But just 20 miles outside of town, there's cartels that are battling for territory. It's just about knowing where to go and not to go. And being informed and being aware. You know, and as far as traveling in Mexico, we travel in Mexico, but we take precautions. We keep track of the local media. There's Facebook groups that will tell you what's going on in the different states. So it's a matter of practicing common sense and always being aware what's around you. And do we have crime here in San Miguel de Allende? Yes, we have property crime. We have people, pickpockets, and people that'll steal your purse. And but that's anywhere you go. So what I tell people is, and then a lot of people have this attitude that, well, you know, the cartel violence is cartel on cartel and they're killing each other and we don't have to worry. Yes, that is true. And so the safety factor may go up a little bit, but the problem is you don't want to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah. Even on this Highway 85 thing that I did on the video that I did on the controversy of the highway of death, you know, everybody keeps saying, everybody keeps traveling this highway. Yeah, there's a lot of police and military. And I'm like, that's the last place you want to be when there's a lot of police and military. Because the problem is that in the United States, in the UK, in other countries, we're used to the police protecting us. That's their job. The military protects us. And that is part of their job here. But when the military and the police are sent into an area to take care of the cartel, they don't discriminate. If they get into a shooting with a cartel, they shoot everybody. And if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it's a matter of, like I said, not being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's a matter of saying, you know what, I can go an hour down the road to Eagle Pass or 2 hours down the road to Eagle Pass, come down, avoid that stretch of highway, avoid the state of Tamaulipas altogether where they're having problems. And I did an ounce of prevention. And what does it hurt? Have people traveled down Highway 85? Yeah, I can tell you that probably there's Americans and Mexicans that are traveling down that highway that are totally fine. Maybe your odds of getting stuck in the middle of one of these battles is 1%, 2%, 3%, but that's a 3% or 4% that I'd rather mitigate. And that's what it comes down to.
I want to go back to the border city since I am a border city and that's where the rumors come from. Border cities, like we said earlier, are looking to possibly go back and forth across the border, working on both sides of the border. What is the reality of safety on specifically border cities?
Well, it all depends. Actually, San Diego's a different animal now. The South Texas border right now is experiencing a lot of problems, and it always has. The state of Tamaulipas has always been a very hot zone. Juarez, which is also across from El Paso, has also been a very hot zone. Um, and Tijuana is kind of a different animal. Is there violence there? Yes. It's a little bit different. And also, you got to remember, too, a lot of these communities that are being built across from San Diego, they're gated communities. They're catering to people that are moving over there and everything else. And it's the same as being, for example, in New York City. If you're in Tijuana, you don't want to go to certain places. So a lot of these places that are being built that I've noticed in Tijuana, especially, that are commuting, most of them are very close to the border. Most of them are in areas on the outskirts. Most of the violence usually happens in town. And so, yes, you do run a risk. And the problem you run into on the border cities is that one day it can be calm because one cartel seizes control, or one faction seizes control, and all of a sudden things calm down. And the next minute there could be battles. It could be a hot zone. Tamaulipas has been that way for years. We have a lot of, in the South Texas border, we have a lot of what they call maquiladora plants, which are plants that manufacture things for the United States. And there's a lot of people that commute back and forth. But if you even look in Reynosa, the places where those plants are located are very close to one of the bridges that's on the outskirts. So these people, they don't go into town. Also, many times when violence does break out, the military, and they don't really go in. They just kind of contain the situation. They kind of put roadblocks and say, don't pass this area right here. So a lot of those border cities, like I said, it's very hard. As a law enforcement person, I would say I wouldn't do it myself personally. But at the same time, I think it is becoming an option for a lot of people. And that risk versus what's reality, especially in California, some people don't have a choice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not a matter of wanting to or not.
Yeah. It's a matter of rent for $2,200 versus $400. That's the
exactly. That's the reality.
And all the extra money on armed guard probably is the answer.
Yeah. Tim, I don't want to take over. I have so many questions, as you know.
Well, we are well over time, but I've got nothing to do for the next quarter of an hour, so you keep going.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to one of the things I've seen, and you've mentioned it in your videos, is like there's citizenship, there's permanent residence, and there's temporary residence, and there's also all this, which to me makes no difference because I'm from the UK, but the whole thing of bringing a car into Mexico seems to be a bit of a strange experience. So could you talk about that a little bit briefly?
Well, actually, the way it works here in Mexico, there's three ways to come into Mexico and live here. Yeah. And actually one of the ways is one of the ones that I talk about. It's kind of illegal, but it is legal in certain instances, and I'll explain how. There are individuals, I don't know, I think you experienced this in San Diego. We experienced this a lot in South Texas. A lot of the people from up north, Canada, even up north in the United States, during the winter time, it gets very cold. So they choose to come south. So they live half the year down here. We have the same thing. We call them snowbirds in South Texas. We have the same thing here in Mexico. There's individuals that buy properties down here, and they come down here and they live for 6 months, or they even bring their RV There's people that bring their RV down all the way down here, and they come and they live here for 6 months during the good weather, and then they go back home to the United States now, or Canada. And we experienced this during the winter time, most of the time. Now, in these cases, you basically get a tourist permit. You can get it for up to 180 days. And you basically come into the country and you have we call it a visa in the United States, a visitor's visa. There's nothing wrong with that. You're visiting because you're just living here for 6 months. What is not legal is every 6 months or every 180 days. I don't want to say 6 months, but because it's actually by days. Every 180 days, running back to the border, exiting the country and coming back in and living here permanently. That's what's illegal. Now, the second form would be temporary residency. This has a certain set of financial requirements. One of the misconceptions, though, that I want to point out about this is everybody concentrates on the monthly minimum financial requirement to come in to become a temporary resident. What people need to understand that it's not just monthly income. You can have an investment account. If you have over $30,000 in a savings account or an investment account, I think it's $35,000. That is one of the qualifying factors. Or if you own a house here that's worth over $280,000, I think it was, or $250,000, you can actually apply for temporary residency. So it's not just, in my video, I say $2,000 a month, $2,100. That was based on the exchange rate at the time. That's changing. And I'll explain in a little while after I explain permanent residency. But with temporary residency, basically, you can have it up to 4 years. You go to your consulate, you apply for a visa, and the visa gives you the ability to come into the country, to go to immigration and apply for your residency. Yeah. The big hurdle is getting past the consulate, is getting the visa. So then there's permanent residency, and permanent residency means that you're going to be a permanent resident. It has higher financial requirements. And the other catch to permanent residency is that it has to be based on a pension source. You cannot come in saying, hey, I make $5,000 a month as a digital nomad. It has to be from a pension. And the other way is being married to a Mexican national. You can, and being married to a Mexican national, you can get either permanent or temporary residency. Now, there's benefits to each one, and there's drawbacks to each one. Of course, the 180 days drawback is that you can only stay here for 180 days. The drawback, now here's the thing with temporary residency. You can, once you have temporary residency for 4 years, you can convert it over to permanent residency with no financial requirements. So that's one. So if you don't meet the financial requirements, you don't have the pension to become a permanent resident, and you still want to come here permanently, you start as a temporary resident, you stay here 4 years, and then you convert over. Now, bringing the vehicle in is a different story as far as what the benefits to temporary residency are. The benefit to temporary residency is that you can temporarily import your vehicle. You can bring your vehicle from the United States, and they call it a temporary import permit because technically by law, you're importing the vehicle, but temporarily. You can get this temporary import permit for the 180 days that I was talking about because while you're a tourist, or you can get this temporary import permit for the duration of your temporary residency. So you can bring your vehicle, you get a permit, and you can drive it around. There's only one catch. If you're a permanent resident or a Mexican citizen, you cannot drive a foreign plated vehicle. Now, there's an exception to this. And on the tip requirements, in the temporary import requirements, it says that family members who are Mexican citizens or permanent residents can actually drive this vehicle. But what people don't understand is this is a customs regulation. It's not, it's Mexican law, but it's an administrative regulation and not a literal law. So what a lot of people do is a couple comes in, one gets their temporary, one gets their permanent. Oh, and we'll just import the car. And when we'll both drive the car. And if they stop us and my husband with permanent residency gets stopped, I have an exception. And they pulled out this exception. And this is where I was talking about how we're kind of a society of rules. And a lot of people, expats, think, oh, I got the law behind me because I got my. The problem is that the Mexican law specifically states that, you know what, you cannot drive a foreign plated vehicle regardless. So you get stopped, and it just depends on who stops you and how nice you are, and you can pull out those regulations, because most of the time, and I would say a majority of the time, the federal police will look at the regulations and yes, you're a relative and not a problem, go on your way. Other times you cop an attitude and the police say, you want to cop an attitude? You want to throw these regulations in my face? Guess what? We're taking your car and you don't get it back.
Yeah.
There is no recourse. There is no legal, I'm going to go to court like you can in the United States when you get your stuff seized. So those are one of the things that I warn people about. And then, for example, I'm a permanent resident, so we have a Mexican plated vehicle. We sold our U.S. vehicles, and we basically have a Mexican vehicle. I bought a Jeep. A lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of vehicles cost a lot here, sometimes double, but that's because of the import taxes. But for example, I bought a Jeep. Jeep is partly manufactured in Mexico. So the Jeep that I bought basically cost the same. Actually, loaded the way I bought it is cheaper than in the United States. So you can buy certain brands of vehicles for the same price you would pay in the United States. The only thing you need to consider is that they don't run credit here. I mean, it's you outright buy your vehicle.
Yeah.
And their vehicle doesn't depreciate like it does in the United States. You can buy a vehicle and 4 years later, it's almost worth what you paid for it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. Well, we're massively over time. So I'll give Christelle the chance to ask a question that Ernie can answer in 1 or 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, let's end on a positive note. What are 3 reasons why I might want to retire in Mexico?
Well, I'll tell you the first reason. It's a beautiful country.
Yeah.
It's full of culture and it's beautiful. No matter where you go, every part has its history and its culture. And that's number one. The second is the quality of life here that you're going to have compared to in other places. Your quality of life on what you are going to make is going to be more. It's going to be better. Your dollar goes further. And I'm going to mention this last, which I did kind of mention right now. And I always mention it last because I always tell people don't move here for purely financial reasons, but for financial reasons. This is an option. Like I said, we're facing a retirement crisis in the United States. People are getting old. People are getting on Social Security, and people can't afford to live on that back where they or maintain their quality of lifestyle. Yeah. And Mexico is an option of maintaining that quality of lifestyle and being in a beautiful country with a beautiful culture. People are just friendly here. I can't explain it. It's just a different place to live, and it's a wonderful place.
Okay, so how can people find out about you and say the name of your channel correctly so people can type it into YouTube search?
Yes, my YouTube channel is called Retired Life in Mexico, No Bull.
Yeah.
And I can be reached. We have a Facebook group also. I also have an Instagram, which is at Retired Life in Mexico, No Bull.
Yeah.
And then I just started a Twitter account, thanks to you guys. And that one is, if you search Retired Life in Mexico, no bull, not one word, but separately, it'll come up. Or it's at SirDragonX123.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 social media platforms I'm on. And that's where you can find me. And I also, like I said, I suggest that for every person considering moving on Mexico, watch as many YouTube videos as you can. I'm not in competition with anybody. I go to as many Facebook groups as you can, ask questions, but at the same time, remember that every experience is different. So when you get a response from a Facebook group, what I may reply is based on my experience. And what you need to do is you really need to look at the answer and see if that answer applies to you, not everybody. Because I can say, I've been living here 20 years and this and this and this. Well, you know what? Your lifestyle is different than my lifestyle. So the same thing with the YouTube channels. Just be aware. Be aware that we all have our different experiences. And I think they're all beneficial because they all give good information, but also to be aware and to really, really take everything with a grain of salt and decide what applies to you and go further from there.
Okay, well, thanks so much for being on the show. And yes, hopefully, for anybody watching the replay on YouTube, somewhere down there should be a subscribe button to this channel. So thanks a lot for everybody who watched. We didn't get any comments, but that might be Facebook playing up again. I suspect we might get a whole load after the show, which we've had a few times recently. But anyway, thanks a lot for everybody watching.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Ernie. Really good to talk to you.
Thanks.
This is terrifying for me.
I've made more money in the last 3 years than I did in the previous 7.
Cliche shit, you know.